This is a future performance. This is a promise of a future performance to be taken here. It will happen here because here is where things grow. This is a future performance for the garden. I will use in that future performance this mochila that my friend Claudia has offered me. She promised to send me an audio explaining these mochilas were made handmade by women in Colombia, but she never did send me that audio, so I will not present it here today. But that will be for a future performance. The performance I will be doing today is about something else. It won't take place on this garden where things grow, but I brought these flowers especially for that. Actually, I had ordered some flowers that never arrived. Honey here helped me with this, but they never arrived. But still, they were red carnations. I tried to explain to the people on the phone why it was so important that they were red carnations, but then I found them. And I will share with you these flowers. They are important for the performance today. These flowers, as you may imagine, are a symbol. They even name a revolution. It's called the Carnation Revolution. I would like each of you to have one of these flowers and keep them. I will talk about the past, but we know that some pasts are so tangible that they become presents every day. So I will talk about a past that is still present. I will talk about names you would not know what they are, places you don't know where they are. Still, those pasts and those names and those people and those presents are so present still. I will talk about that. By the end of it, you may even, maybe, who knows, sing a song with me. Yesterday was the first time in many years that I wasn't there. I wasn't there to march down those avenues. I wasn't there. I wasn't there when they were marching down the avenue. I wasn't there. I wasn't there when they were singing those songs. That one song, actually. I wasn't there. I wish I was, but I was here. They are holding carnations in their hands, like us today. So even though it's taking place one day after, it's still some sort of celebration. And I invite you to celebration right now. Welcome, very welcome to this item of my living museum of small, forgotten and unwanted memories. Today at the basement of Price Institute world tour I am making. I will talk about the story of this small country in a corner of an old continent called Europe. Yes. While preparing for this presentation, I was thinking about a sentence by Elizabeth Helling in a book called State Repression and the Struggles for Memory. And she says, not in Portuguese, in English, the text may appear decentered. In fact, such is the nature of memory itself, decentered. Decentered as I myself feel I think about memory as perhaps a long corridor with doors on each side. Sometimes we open one door, or sometimes we go through another door. On the verge of this corridor, I go into a room and there's this music playing, this music that they played that same night, 25th of April, yes, when there were still no carnations in the streets. That same song that actually triggered it all. I think about it and I want to play it. I was thinking that my friend Rita, the other day we were talking about this, and she said, you know, when I hear this song, I still want to cry. And I told her, but still how? You weren't there, so you cannot like say things that way. And she says, well, you know, I'm still moved to tears by this song. And I thought, okay, these memories belong to us even though we were not there.
Grândola Vila Morena, terra da fraternidade, o povo é quem mais ordena.
I was thinking when I was listening to this song about the different reactions to people that night while listening to this forbidden song in the radio. Some people were obviously taken aback, thinking, what is happening? This song is forbidden. But others, in the former ex-colonies, for example, for whom this song doesn't mean anything really, and this date doesn't mean anything really, they wouldn't especially feel anything about it. Or even other people, like this man, sneaking against the walls, as if he was trying to fight anything, as if he was trying to get away or something. Here, this man, supposedly a former policeman of the political police in Portugal, which was called PIDE. That was the name of our political police. Each political police has always a name, so ours was PIDE. And this man, supposedly, this photograph, which I like very much, won the first prize in World Press Photo 1974. And the photographer is called Henri Bourreau. And we know today that this man was not a former agent of the political police. Actually, he was a man that had been troubled, maybe. That's what we know today. And here was being cornered by soldiers. You know, but for posterity, for history, what we read today when we open the internet and we see this picture is that this was a secret agent from the police that was arrested during Spinola's coup during the Salazar's regime. And of course, for you guys, this doesn't mean anything, but for a Portuguese person, this actually, this subtitle presents three problems. The first problem is the man is not a pit police, so we know today he was no agent of the political police. The second aspect is that this coup was not a coup staged by that guy Spinola, which for you, again, doesn't mean anything, but you know, he was a general, he's the one. Okay, and he didn't really make the coup, but of course we always need these figures to say that it was very important. And then of course the Salazar was not the dictator anymore. It was another dictator because we had two, but anyway, Salazar was deceased. But for the historical record, we now think that this picture was taken in another country, really. So that I will leave for another performance, which will be how we record the historical facts. That is another performance. Coming back to this picture, so this Henri Bourreau, who was the photographer who won this first prize of World Press Photo, he didn't really like revolutions. And I know this because I interviewed Sérgio Treffaut. And who is Sérgio Treffaut? He's a Portuguese movie director that speaks with a Brazilian accent because his parents had to be exiled in Brazil due to the dictatorship. So then he started making films, and he made a film with all these images from foreign reporters, documentaries that came to Portugal to document the Portuguese Revolution. And that's when he interviewed Henri Bourreau and discovered he wasn't really interested in revolutions. Contrary to many others, documentaries, those great documentaries worldwide, like Sebastião Salgado and others that really came to Portugal and fell in love with the Portuguese Revolution. Sérgio Treffaut, this movie director, even thought that maybe he could make an exhibition with all these materials that he discovered were all out there. They were not in Portugal. And he even thought that maybe he could stage this exhibition in the former headquarters of the political police, PIDE, in Lisbon, which is now a luxury condo. But that didn't work out. He said that, during the 1990s, Joana, people, they weren't really interested in talking about those times of the Portuguese Revolution. They thought that we were a very childish, people. Our forced armies armed forces were also very childish at that time. They believed in the revolution. So in 1980s, people didn't want to talk about it. That's why Sergio got really angry. And instead of making that exhibition, he actually made a film that we today can access, and it's called Another Country, which is a name I really like because it really looks like another country. And he used all those archives that they managed to record during those times. I asked Sergio, so when did you return to Portugal? How was it with your parents? What did you feel when you arrived in Portugal during the revolution? And he said, one of the revolution was like, let's say, it was like a steamer, one of those pots, those steaming pots that made many things turn upside down. One of the things was a growing number of divorces. My own parents got divorced in August 1974. I then asked Sergio, are you being somehow critical or negative when you use the word like steaming pot or steamer? And he answers, not at all. That's just what it truly was. Indeed, different challenges have been presented as to the transmission of this revolution in Portugal, this revolutionary process, as it is called, the timeline of which is also hard to establish because it is subject to different historical and ideological interpretations, and specifically the fact that to the end of the 1990s, most researchers that analyzed this period actually had been agents and participants in the same period. So it was very difficult to get what we like, objectivity, for example. That's why Boaventura de Sousa Santos, this very important Portuguese sociologist, while commenting on this revolution 10 years after the revolution in 1984, he said, it's still early for us to analyze the revolution because each of us, our own way, are today the researchers of a period where we were engaged activists. So Elizabeth Hellin also talks about the sufficient time that is needed to elapse so that these memories can become the central subject of analysis, regardless of how conflicting that analysis may be. The Portuguese case entailed not only this bloodless revolution conducted by military, which is very original, militaries normally don't topple dictatorships, they put dictatorships in power, but anyway, so ours was very original, really, but also something that happened after the day of the actual revolution, which was this revolutionary process, this ongoing revolutionary process, which we named PREC in Portuguese, Processo Revolucionário em Curso, ongoing revolutionary process. So it was a process, and this really, the motto was truly power to the people. To tell you the truth, I analyzed all the programs from the political parties in 1974-75, and all of them, but I say all of them, had as final aim the building a socialist society. All of them. So this was throughout all Portuguese society. So I think this case, really, the case of the Portuguese Revolution, is really a unique case in these transitional processes around the world. But at the same time, we Portuguese people, and maybe others, but we especially are still trying to come to terms to what really happened, which is always a big question in historical research. What really happened? And I'll try to explain to you why. And this is where I will quote maybe theater. Yes, theater. So I was thinking about Waiting for Godot from Samuel Beckett. And because there is this dialogue between Vladimir and Stragon, so I don't know if you know this play, but they both are waiting for someone that never comes, Godot. And at one point, Stragon is trying to is responding to Vladimir's insisting question of what happened the day before. So Stragon doesn't remember what happened the day before because they're in circles, they're lost in time. And then Stragon says, I am not a historian. Don't bother me with these questions, I'm not a historian to know what happened yesterday. So I like this sentence because I'm not a historian neither, nor I intend to be one. I wasn't even born at the time of the Portuguese Revolution, although I actually was born during the revolutionary process, so I guess I lived 1 year of the revolutionary process, but I don't remember. I think I was too young to go with my mother to all those cooperatives that she used to work, and because of course my mother was bourgeois, so she had then to, mop the floors because you couldn't be bourgeois and all that, but maybe you don't know what that means, but anyway, she had to do a lot of self-critique because she was bourgeois. But I do remember that my mother used to have a lot of Chinese souvenirs, and I know Jack will love this, and all our house was filled with Chinese memorabilia, to be honest with you. And I do remember that, but I don't remember my mother buying those stuff. I don't remember, but she says they were everywhere in Lisbon. You could get these, posters and statues and things, of course from the Chinese Revolution. So I started to think, what were my first political memories? What did I remember really from those times? And then I remembered that I was little, but my parents were urban planners, and we used to go every weekend to this little shanty neighborhood near a very rich area in Portugal called Sintra, and they were really helping the people there to build sewage, water, electricity, all of that. So my parents would give their time to that place that they completely helped to transform, and no one was getting any money out of that. It was all voluntary work. And I think this memory, I would place it in a performance called What Remained of the Revolution, rather than When the Revolution Ends. So maybe I will not go on with that, but for me that was actually my experience of the Portuguese Revolution. Maybe I will call here an expression from Freddie Rockham, where he says that actors are hyper-historians, and he says the actors serve as connecting link between the historical past and the fictional performed here and now of the theatrical event. They become a kind of historian, what I call a hyper-historian. So to the title of this performance, being a hyper-historian, not a historian, I really added the subtitle, Fragments of an Attempted Answer, because I discovered it is too difficult to establish when did the revolution end. And I'm telling you, spoiling the end for you, but it's true. So please bear with me while I attempt, in my condition of a kind of hyper-historian, disguised as performance lecturer, disguised as person that listens to the voices and to the songs. So I was thinking, what exactly does the word revolution mean, so we can establish when it ended? In 1984, 10 years after the Portuguese Revolution of 74, Boaventura de Sousa Santos, whom I quoted here earlier, this sociologist, very important sociologist, he said, so it was the 10th anniversary of the revolution, and he said, today there are at least two 25th of April, a fracture dramatically revealed in the recent commemorations of the 10th anniversary of the revolution. So I was exactly 10 years old when he said this, and I don't know, this was in a conference, and I've read the books of those conferences, so I was 10 years old. I don't know what he meant that there were two 25th of April, where this memory was conflicting, because actually for me, it was like pretty much never conflicting memory. I knew very well what I felt about this since I was little, but then I started thinking when this became also problematic memory for me. And I remembered in high school, I'm here, high school, Benfica High School, that's where I grew up. We received the visit of a writer called Augusto Bleida. He had been an anti-fascist writer. And he came to our school to give a talk in 1987, I think. And he was giving a talk about his experience, and in that time people spoke a lot about the memories of fascism and of the revolution. So he was talking, and the brother of a colleague of mine, his name was Rodrigo, I think, he stood up and he said, "I'm sorry, but," to Augusto Bleida, to the writer, he said, "I'm sorry, but what happened in Portugal wasn't a fascist regime. Rather, it was a traditionalistic democracy." I can never forget the face of this writer, Augusto Bleida, facing this young man that was telling him in his face that what he had experienced for 48 years, being persecuted, imprisoned, censored, his books censored, banned, had in fact not been a dictatorship after all. And that's when I confronted historical revisionism live for the first time, and I never ever forgot. I was ashamed. Then I remembered this investigation by a fellow anthropologist called Tiago Matos Silva, Portuguese anthropologist, in this book called Parents of April, Sons of November. This is a very interesting book because he interviews families from the far left to the far right, trying to establish how the memories of the revolution are transmitted within the family. So he interviews the children and the parents to establish a kind of lineage of the transmission of memories. And I really like this book. It's groundbreaking, it's very interesting. And I went to see, why did Tiago, this anthropologist, make this book? Because I'm very interested in why people are motivated to research what they research. So I really like to read introductions, acknowledgements, and all that. And so his opening words are, "The 25th of April 1974 was always for me a subject of curiosity," says this anthropologist, "and mystery. Born in 1976, I wasn't even an unconscious witness, but the truth is that I could easily feel the trauma that 28 years past still divides a whole country." When I read this sentence, I was taken aback by the word trauma. It had never occurred to me that the memory of the revolution could be a trauma when I read this the first time. But of course, I was very aware that depending on the education we had, on the ideology, of our parents, we could well see the revolution as a trauma, or as, for example, revolution is the greatest to blame for all the problems we have today, things like that, But then I remembered an encounter I had with historian Fernando Rosas, very big historian of these things in Portugal, where he told me, and I remember that very well, the left wings, the right wings, we all will always say we have democracy in spite of the revolution. But I say we have a democracy because of the revolution. And this in spite because really troubled me. So I came into, this equation that maybe we can have 3 words to define the word revolution, so that we can establish what ended and when. Okay, so first option for the word revolution in the Portuguese case, the day of the 25th of April 1974, which, like I told you today, is called the Carnation Revolution. Okay, I think this is quite consensual, and people often use the word revolution to name the actual day when the coup was staged by the military forces. But then you can think, okay, but it was just one day, right? So another possibility for the use of the word revolution in the Portuguese case is for the subsequent 19 months. what happened then? We call it the ongoing revolutionary process, like I told you, which is in Portuguese is the acronym PREC. So this time, you know, this evenement, like historians say, it was a time where the popular power took to the streets. You know, people were told to stay at home, but they didn't stay at home. So they went to the streets, and thousands of people in the streets. And that's when it all started, you know, like agrarian reform, occupations of lands, expropriations. We had campaigns of cultural engagement, demonstrations, really an urge of direct democracy. It was like an incubator of new ways of democracy. So this is a memory that still divides many people. So people that I talk to will tell me that it was a chaos, it almost ruined the country, but that many other, and I would say majority, will, even if they lower their voices, they will say, you know, those were the best times of my life. That was fantastic, you know, and they will tell you with this twinkle in their eyes of something that I will never know because it's a kind of a utopia. That's why many foreigners came to Portugal. They were coming to look for this revolution in the corner of Europe, the Cuba of Europe, like it was called, you know, and amongst these, there was this man called Phil Miller that wrote this book, Portugal, the Impossible Revolution. Phil Miller is an Irishman that was living in Portugal at the time as a teacher. And in the preface to his book, Maurice Brinton, who is an Englishman from Solidarity in London, writes, to an outsider, there was much that was specifically Portuguese in the Portuguese absurd. The will to dare the unknown, to disregard the advice of experts, to take history and reality by the scruff of the neck was very evident in the early months. Without battling an eyelid at the enormity of what they were attempting, young revolutionaries and older ones talk seriously of the direct transition from fascism to libertarian communism. They acted as if belief in miracles could drive people to attempt, and who knows, perhaps even to achieve the impossible. So these people that were really, in love with the Portuguese revolutions were actually the ones that later tell the revolution in Portugal was a failed revolution. So in Portuguese it's called a revolução falhada. And they were very angry that we never managed to do the revolution they so wanted, but they weren't able to really perform it in their own countries, which is really interesting. And we, of course, all revolutions are doomed to fail anyhow. But third option, okay, not going on about revolutions, how they are failed they're prone to fail. So third option is maybe when they will use the word revolution, they can also be referring to this episode which took place in 25th of November 1975. Sorry about all these dates, but it's really important because on the 25th of November 1975, it's a very conflicting memory, but basically what happened was that a counter coup was staged, and people thought that it was like a coup like the one that had been in Chile with the Pinochet regime. So if you don't know about it, it's really important because it had great intervention by the United States. And of course the United States were involved also in this. And so we had this like counter coup where these very moderate forces within the armed forces, the moderate officials and also the Socialist Party, the left, the right wings, they tried to put a stop to what they called was the Soviet revolution that was being made in Portugal. But there are no evidence of that. So there is no evidence that we had a Soviet coup coming on, okay? So this really was a perfect alibi to reinforce what they called democratic normalization and really put an end to all those popular movements, all those occupations, all of that. And that's why one of the chants at the time in Portugal was, Portugal will not be the Chile of Europe. Exactly because there was this parallel with the case of the Chileans and the Pinochet regime. But actually the Communist Party until the end, this was Álvaro Cunhal, who was the great leader of the Communist Party, at the time. He was he was in prison for many years, and he was a man that, in his funeral when he died in the 1990s, there were like thousands and thousands of people in the streets of Lisbon accompanying his funeral. So he was really like very esteemed and respected man. And he, till the end of his life, he denied preparing any sort of Soviet coup or Soviet push. So that somehow had been the reason that they claimed they were doing this kind of counter coup. So I was looking to know what the ordinary people say about this coup of the 25th of November, because when I asked my father about this, he said, "Oh, leave it, it's too complicated." And whenever I ask anyone, they always say, "Oh no, it's so complicated. Don't go that way. Don't go down that way." So 25th of November 1975. I found an archive. It's from a commune that had been occupied in central Portugal called Torre Bela, and a German guy will make a film about this in 1976. Letters that were exchanged between a couple, Eduarda and José. This couple were exchanging letters on that same day of this coup. She asks, Eduarda, writing from Germany, where she was living, "What is concretely going on in Portugal? We are all seriously confused. The radio, there was news of a coup from the left, but why didn't all the left support it? I fear the people of the communes will be dispirited now that they see the revolutionary process retreating." But her husband doesn't reply. So because there was no communication, there were no post office, but then he writes and he says, "Things are really confusing. It's going to be the end of the revolution, but maybe, there's some hope that we will turn this around." But then he describes in another letter an episode where he was taking his van, his Honomag van that worked for the commune, and he was in the center of Portugal, and then all of a sudden, because his van, the license plate was German and not Portuguese. He was Portuguese, but anyway, people really circled the van and started insulting him and telling him to go back to his country. So he writes in a letter to his wife, what a terrible thing. How I come to find my homeland and my people. Not even in the former times of fascism have I seen such a thing. But the truth is that the class struggle and the liberation of the explored and the oppressed is not easy, because the enemy is numberless and powerful. For example, my friend Phil Mailer, the Irishman that I later interviewed, he was also looking for guns on that day of the 25th of November. He went to the army to see if he could defend the leftist revolution, because no one knew what was going on. And he says, "Like everyone else, I was in the streets on the 25th of November. In cafes and squares, people argued animatedly in groups. Is this a communist coup?" someone asked. "This is the revolution, I think," another replied. "What about Russia then?" came in a third. The discussions were lively, but they were all external to people's real lives. It might have been happening in another world. In no way were the workers going to support one side or the other. After 20 months of the revolutionary process and the leftist talk, they had drawn one conclusion: revolutions and counter-revolutions were jobs for specialists. And anyway, they had to work tomorrow. So this was the end of the revolutionary process. Whether this really, was the end of the revolution or not, I think that's entirely a different subject. And I'll try to explain you why I think this. The historian M, very prominent Portuguese historian, who told me she doesn't want to investigate this process because she considers that she doesn't have the necessary objectivity, because she was an agent in the process. She answers the following way to the question, when did the revolution end? She told me, "I cannot tell the exact moment. Nowadays, I don't know if that was really a revolution. We considered it a transitional period because we don't know many things. We didn't know back then that we know today. Although today we still don't have the full picture because not everyone has talked. More than a revolution, I would call it a revolutionary crisis with several possibilities. But you are talking to someone who isn't the same anymore, the one that I was back then. I have questioned it all. I didn't understand anything. I wanted the revolution, but for me the revolution was what was happening in China, And I know today what happened in China and Cambodia. I mean, we weren't for the things that happened in Cambodia, but we were for the Cultural Revolution. So today when I see those movies that depict all those regimes, those people arrested, tortured, you know, totalitarian regimes, it's very hard to me to accept that I defended those regimes, you know. It has taken me a long time, and I even went into depression because of it. It isn't an easy process. It's traumatic. It's solitary, because when you leave a movement, you move to the other side of the barricade. So here I thought about that word trauma that Tiago Matos Silva had used, and I thought, okay, maybe the word traumatic has, you know, a place here. The next moment, I decided to call my mom and ask her when she thinks the revolution ended. To my amazement, my mother said, there was no revolution, Joana. At least not culturally, that is. Think about the, you know, women and gender issues. It didn't really result in any structural changes to our society. When I was growing up, my parents were always fighting, okay? Always fighting in arguments about politics. I remember that. So the struggles between political parties after the revolution were really fratricide, you know, left-wing parties against left-wing parties. And I remember my father calling my mother a Maoist. I remember that, you know, Maoista in Portuguese, you know. And I didn't know what the hell was that, but I didn't like the name, you know. Of course, I didn't realize back then that all my children's books were actually, you know, from China, Maoist books that me and my brother used to read. You know, I didn't know that back then. But I was very worried that my mom might be part of some cult or something like that. You know, I don't remember the revolutionary process or anything like that, but I think I had my own process of seeing the revolution end year after year, as the so-called revolutionary books that were everywhere in my house were then being removed from the shelves and being stored in some, you know, places difficult to access, like an old cupboard or underneath the bed linen, you know, all those books that used to be in the shelves, you know. And then finally the statement from my father, which for me marked the end of the revolution, was then when he said, I am going to donate several boxes of books and documents to the 25th of April Archive Center. So almost 15 years after he said this, I visited this center, documentary center, which is in Coimbra, north of Portugal, the only place we have an archive of the 25th of April. And I presented myself as, I'm going to say, a researcher of ways of transmission of political memory of the revolution in Portugal. This is how I present myself. And I was looking for an exemplary of the Little Red Book from Mao Zedong, because, you know, I had to use in a performance, but then all these people that had been Maoists, they didn't have those books because they said, oh, I stored that away and I threw it away and all that. So now I have like 4 of these. So whenever I need for my performances, you know, yeah. But the first I got from that documentation center. And I asked them, oh, by the way, my father has donated a box full of books and all that. And because they have it all ordered by the name of the people who donated, I looked up the name of my father, and I said, no, we don't have that donation. So I went home a bit ashamed that I didn't find that. And actually, I found the box. It was laying like in my mom's house because they separated, and so we never donated the box to the documentary center, but it was in my mom's house, so I took it with me. Of course, this is not the original box, but the original box is white, okay? And my father wrote Museum of 25th of April, which I told him is very optimistic because we don't have a museum of the 25th of April. But okay, my father, a very hopeful person. It's called an archive, it's not a museum. So there were lots of things inside that, and I have some samples inside that box, which for me was like a Pandora box. They had, you know, pamphlets, a book on Chile, of course. They had like a Red Star, this is like a Maoist magazine. They had many books from Lenin and Stalin, which I didn't bring here because maybe they won't let me into the United States. So, you know, and people were like, you better not travel with that to the United States because maybe they will, you know, hold you. But anyway, these are all like artifacts from that time. Mao Zedong again. And I kind of, had this feeling I thought about my parents doing something together, like, throwing those pamphlets. These were all forbidden pamphlets, okay, by the way. This is all forbidden stuff from the time of the dictatorship. So I imagined them like on the 5th floor of a building, and this falling in a sidewalk, and someone picking it up and reading, "The student Ribeiro dos Santos was assassinated by the political police. Down with fascist terror." I don't know. I was really proud of my parents when I opened that box, because at that moment I didn't know really what they did, but seeing all those forbidden articles, seeing that they really were engaged in this struggle, grassroots struggle, really made me so proud. The day of the 25th of November 1975, that counter coup, my father received a phone call to go undercover, to become a clandestine. So he went to a house to wait for guns that would be delivered to him, and then he could help and perform the so-called leftist coup that no one can tell me if really was underway. That day, my father never got those guns. I asked him, "Did you know how to fire a gun?" And he said, "No." "Were you afraid?" And he said, "I don't know." I said, "What happened then?" He said, "Well, nothing happened. Guns never came." "And what happened then?" "I went home, 26. "And what happened then?" "I gave up on politics." I asked him also, "When did the revolution end?" And he couldn't really say. There was this silence, which for me was an answer. And then he said, "I think the revolution had already ended by then." And then I realized that, this 40 minutes is just so little time to tell all, the conflicting memories and the profound contradictions of this so-called revolution, revolutionary process, revolutionary coup, and establish exactly when it ended. Because each person has his or her own experience, or because, like the historian M said, some are still, they're not talking yet. And this idea that some of them are holding secrets is still very present in the Portuguese society. And in the middle of all this, I bump into a friend of mine, T. It's just actually a friend of my parents, T, Teresa, and she tells me, "Oh, I have a story about the revolution and I want to tell you. Do you know when the revolution ended?" And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Teresa, but I don't have time, and I still, it's already over 40 minutes, this performance, and I still have a postscript." So my last story is that in October 2013, in Senate House Library in London, which is a library that I really like, I wanted to take so many books out, but they would only allow me for 4 books. I had chosen like 20, and then I had to choose between all those books, and I decided, okay, I will only take books written by foreign people about the Portuguese Revolution. And that's when I came across this book from this man, John Hammond, Building Popular Power. And I started, I always like to read the prefaces, acknowledgements, like I told you, and first words, he says, "Revolutions must not only bring changes in must not only bring changes in political structures. Transforming society requires transforming the lives of ordinary people too. In Portugal, in 1974 and 75, ordinary people challenged the social order forcefully, turning a military coup into an attempted revolution." And I love this. I was like, wow, this guy understood it all. Yeah, that's it. I'm going to take this book. And then I went to see whom he acknowledges, the thank you part, which I really like, because we always have so many people to thank. And so the guy thanked my parents, which I was like, what? Fernando Ventrias and Nunes da Silva, these are my parents. I was like, oh my God. I called my parents. I remember I was in London. I remember the exact place where I made this phone call. I called my mom, and she says, "Yeah, I remember this. yeah, this US American, a really tall guy with a beard, yeah. Then I called my father, and he was like, it's separated, I have 1 hour on. And he's like, yeah, I remember this US American, he had a bicycle. And they both agreed he was not with the CIA, because they had another American friend, which was probably working for the CIA, but that we will never know, you know. And I was really amazed at the part that chance plays, you know, in researching into lost archives, small memory, and these anonymous agents of history. Little would I know that some, say, 5 years later, I would actually meet on Zoom this man, John Hammond, actually is Jack, that's how we call him, and I would interview him after he told me, yeah, I know so well who your parents are. I even knew you when you were little. And Jack actually introduced me to his other friends who were part of this group called the Apoio group to the Portuguese Revolution. And they issued these bulletins throughout the year of 1976. And their name, Apoio, which actually in Portuguese means support, the acronym reads American Portuguese Overseas Information Organization. I was so amazed again at all these intricate connections, how the small histories intertwine in ways that I couldn't possibly imagine. And this is when I usually start to close my notebooks, to play that song again, that song that means the revolution. I picture everything. I picture my friend Rita crying when she was hearing this song. I picture my friend Peter Robinson, who didn't speak Portuguese but went to Portugal in 1975 with the International Socialists, and he said it was fantastic, you know, everything occupied, the people in the streets, I was so moved. Or this other man called George that told me he had a story for me, and he was waiting for me in Lisbon, in a place that we made an arrangement, and he took me into the memories, his memories of the revolution, in a tour through the city. And I even never met him, he just wanted to tell me that. Or the friend of my father who, when he was about to die in hospital, you know, he was really like ill, and he said to my father, you know, those memories, the things we live, that we experience, no one can take that away from us. And those memories are the memories of this so-called revolution that I was unable today to tell you when it ended, but I can definitely establish when it started, and that it still maybe is unfolding in the so present memories and these persisting memories of these people, and that's why the past is so tangible for them. And I thank you for being here and listening to my stories. This will conclude my performance. Okay.